podcast family. Welcome to Motherhood in Black and White. My name is Kaanji.
I'm Tara.
This week, we are going to have a conversation about raising biracial or multiracial children. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart as I am raising a biracial son who identifies as Black. The reason I think we wanted to have this conversation, Tara, is I was doing a presentation in my work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And I was looking at some statistics in the U.S. Census. And a statistic that came out, and it was really striking to me, it showed that in 2010, 4% of the U.S. population identified as multiracial. And that was about 9 million people.
You said 2010?
In 2010.
4%.
Correct.
Okay.
In 2020,
okay,
10% of the U.S. population identifies as multiracial, and that's almost 34 million people. So we went from 9 million people to 34 million people who identify as members of one or more racial groups in just a 10-year period. And that biggest change has been in people under the age of 18.
Honestly, my biggest question on my face that you can see is that I feel like those percentages were lower than I would have expected.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if it's maybe... I don't know. Maybe I just hang out with a different crowd. I just feel like, really? I thought there was way more than that.
Well, I think what we look is you think of the trends.
Yeah.
And one of the trends is that 50 years ago, it was illegal
That's right.
for people to, quote unquote, mix races.
Correct.
And especially when you think about white Americans, it was illegal for white Americans to marry members of
Different races.
Right. Let's put it out there.
Yeah.
So
they can only marry white people. It was illegal to marry anybody other than a white person.
shout out to
just
the
say it
Lovings.
right.
Loving versus
Yes.
Virginia changed that when the U.S. Supreme Court finally found that state laws that made it illegal for groups of different races to marry were illegal. So they call them anti-miscegenation laws. So we think like back like 40 or 50 years ago, how rare it was to see people of different races, kind of from multiracial people in our age group.
Yeah.
I'm almost 50 and you are
43.
So we do have friends that are multiracial, who identify sometimes as multiracial or as biracial.
Yep.
However, it's not nearly the numbers that I see in my son's friend group.
I guess that's true.
Do you see that as well?
Yes. If I think about that, if I really think about that, that is true. Because I grew up, we've talked about it. I grew up in schools where there were way more multiracial, biracial. I had a bunch of my friends, ton of my friends were. But now if I think about where Gage goes to school, it's not non-existent, but it's definitely not like what I grew up with.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons for a lower number in 2010 is a reason that you just touched on, Tara. When we grew up, when there were people that were multiracial or biracial, there were no options to check more than one.
That's true.
You were, and in many cases still are, put in a box.
Correct.
So what's happened historically, if you had a person who was biracial, let's say they were Black and white, of Black and white parentage, they typically identified either as Black or as the race that they most closely looked like.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Like what a person would take them for.
Correct.
Right.
And so we had that, and it really has not been until the last 8 or 10 years where people start to quote and say, I'm biracial. And then that leads to another conversation. And you have conversations where people are like, well, what are you? And that's something that I think that my son has had happen to him and some of his friends. And I think we should take a step back and start this conversation kind of at the beginning. Because we're going to get a little heated way too quickly. Right.
Right.
So I mentioned, if you've been listening to this podcast, Motherhood in Black and White, we started this podcast because Tara and I are mothers of different cultural, racial, and ethnic backgrounds, but both of us are raising boys that are very similar in ages.
Yes.
I am an African-American woman. As we just said, I'm in my late 40s, which is so hard to believe.
You look good, girl.
Girl, thank you. Because you know why Black don't crack.
We don't get that. That is fun. I wish I had a little bit of that.
It's all about that melanin. And Tara is a white mother.
Yes.
In her early 40s.
Correct.
Raising a white son. And you were married to a white man.
Yes.
So your son identifies as white. He's a white man. White kid, excuse me. So I am married to a white man. And my son identifies as Black. I had a conversation with him just a couple of weeks ago. And I said, Roman, do you identify as biracial? And he said, no, mommy, I'm black. I said, well, why is that? He said, because I look black. And I said, well, how do you think that would make dad feel?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you are kind of not recognizing or owning that part of his heritage? Do you feel like you're forced to choose? And Roman, because he's Roman, is like, well, Mom, you know, Dad's Italian and they're really black anyway.
Okay. I was literally in my head thinking, well, he's actually Italian, which is different. So I wasn't going to say it like that, though.
But that's how my son says
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So he's like, and my genes are strong. Roman looks like a brown-skinned black boy.
He does.
And sometimes he's at school at the beginning of the school year, and his dad went to pick him up. And one of the kids was like, who's that? And he's like, that's my dad. He's like, they were like, your real dad or your stepdad?
Oh.
So, and that's something he's gotten his entire life.
Right.
Are people not realizing, because our minds are so intent on trying to figure things out.
Label things.
Right. We want to categorize and make sense of what we see. And so when we think about humans, we automatically are trying to put people in boxes or make sense or categorize things. Yeah. And so if we see a person, and especially here in the United States, where we have such a storied history of race and racism and mistreatment of brown and black people, we want to try to figure out like where people belong, what makes sense.
Right.
And so when people see Roman, they see him as a black child, and that's how he is treated.
Yeah.
We have conversations because he has a really good friend who is biracial, who has a black father and a white mother, and who appears facially white. And so Roman and this other student, friend of his, have been friends since kindergarten. And when Roman was younger, he used to say that his friend was white, but he was black. And I'd say, well, both of you are biracial. And he's like, no, but he's not black. Why does he say he's black? So it's weird because I think sometimes our kids are forced to choose.
Yeah.
And that's because of the society and the culture and the way that we're growing up and raising them. And I'm wondering like how we can equip them and maybe equip ourselves with the language and the tools and the resources to kind of open up and expand that conversation.
Well, and that was a question I was thinking of. And by the way, you were the one who introduced the term facially white and facially black to me.
Really?
Yes. I think it happened the first time we interviewed someone a couple of years ago, and her father was black, her mother was white, but she appears white. She looks like a white woman to me. And I didn't have a term for that. And you were the one who introduced it to me. I'm like, that's a great term. I'm going to use it. So I've used it since. But
the other term, I was going to say the other term is white passing.
White passing. And I knew that one. That one never felt right to me for some reason.
Right.
I don't like that, but I understand what you're saying. So I guess one question I was thinking of is for people who are just curious about someone's background, or like, I know I have friends sometimes we'll be out and we'll just be people watching and they'll be like, oh, they look like they might be mixed with something, like more than one. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to help with language, but I struggle with, how can a person ask a question if they're just being curious or about background? I hate the question, what are you? And I'm not a big fan of like, where are you from either. I mean, do you suggest any, like a question that's a little bit more, I don't know, curious as opposed to, labeling? Yeah. A better way to ask that?
No, that's a great question. I think the first thing we need to realize is kind of an internal question we have to ask ourselves is why?
Why are we curious?
Why are we curious?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a great question.
And we think about how we look at people and what we're looking at when we see people and what it is about our brains and what it is about our minds that are trying to kind of like figure out someone who may appear, quote unquote, either ethnically or racially ambiguous.
Yes. That's a great term.
Because again, we try to place people in categories that the U.S. Census Bureau and the U.S. government has already put in boxes. Like, are you white, black, Latino? It's like, And what is your race and what is your ethnicity?
Yeah.
And we question, like, why are we still having these conversations? Why is it still mattering? Why do we still want people, and why do we want our kids to check the box?
To identify as something.
Right.
Right.
And one thing that we need to understand is when they did start making the option for multiracial or other, what's happening is more people are starting to put that as a description of themselves, because we don't want to just be in any one box.
Yeah.
Because what happens is we do start to deny a heritage of people that may have existed on certain sides, right? And you know this, my last name is of Irish heritage.
That's right.
So
that's right.
You know, my Black heritage, we are formerly enslaved African Americans coming from the South, and I have an Irish great grandfather. I look a fool if I go out wearing like Kiss Me I'm Irish shirts, right?
Well, you do it. I've seen. No, I'm just kidding.
Listen,
ask me about it, guys.
I will drink a Guinness beer in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
right. I'm gonna be wearing my kilt on March 17th. But people, if I said yes, I'm Irish, people would look at me all sorts of wild and crazy because they're like, but
you can't be Irish because you're Black. Right. Yeah, right.
And I think that what we need to do is kind of like start to figure out, like, what's the deeper conversation here? What is it that we're trying to figure out, and why? When we look at someone, why is there in our minds this need to say, like, well, where is that person from? Or what is it that that person's background, ethnic or racial or cultural background could be?
Yeah.
Because I just sense that oftentimes what we are trying to do is not only put people in boxes, but also trying to then figure out how they fit in our system and our stereotypes that we have in our own minds, in our brain. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if I'm looking at that person, and are they Latina or are they not? And it's like, oh, if you find out that that person is Latina, then what are the stereotypes or images or preconceived notions that are then going to attach, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot of times when we start to figure out, like, where is this person from? What is their background? So rather than doing that, what I try to do, and it's hard because it's not how our brains are wired, is I try to get to a space and a place where I'm consciously like pausing before I'm trying to identify someone and question, like, is it necessary to a conversation to have or know this information?
That's a good check.
You know, say, like, why am I questioning who or what they are? How relevant is it to a conversation I'm going to have or a story I'm telling? And is it or is it not? And then if I'm in a situation or a position, I can ask someone, hey, do you mind me asking, like, what's your cultural background? What's your ethnic background?
Okay. So that's an appropriate, if it's the right reason.
If it's the right
ask the
reason.
question.
If you're just asking because you want to figure out, like, why the texture of their hair is the way it is.
That's not the right reason.
Is your skin naturally tan? Right.
Yeah.
Then that may not be the right reason.
Yeah. Well, and I've had moments too where, like, somebody with me has said, like, oh, I wonder, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't think it matters. I say that a lot. Like, I don't really care, or, you know what I mean? So I get what you're saying too. I mean, because it's not really relevant.
Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit, you know, has anyone ever questioned whether or not you have, because you grew up in an area where there was a lot of Black people around you, did anyone ever question, like, well, on your daddy's side, do you have a little, maybe even the summer when you got a little tan, Tara? What were those conversations like?
Those conversations were, usually it was about the size of my behind and my lips. It was always about, I'm so sorry, I'm just telling you guys how it went down. And it happened a few times. And also, you know, I fit into the culture in general just from being around it. So people made jokes a lot more than anything. But sometimes it was often about just like the shape of my body. It was like, are you sure? Like, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I haven't done like the full gene chart, but it's possible back there. You know, aren't we all kind of from the same place? Right. But it was always more like a silly joke. Just from time to time, I would get a serious question about it. But it was usually about the way I looked.
Really? I think one thing that we talk about biracial children, and I'm taking this from the perspective of my son being Black and white, when he gets questioned, it's generally, again, he's brown skinned. It's generally about the texture of his hair. And so people, when they see the texture of his hair, they're questioning, well, why is it curly?
Yeah.
Right. And then sometimes people, touch his hair without permission.
Oh, I hate that. That makes me insane.
And sometimes people make comments about hair and the texture and the quality. And I have two nieces who are also biracial. My older brother married a white woman, and they have very, very light blonde, like really long curly hair.
Right.
And so people are constantly, and have always their entire lives, well, one of them has curly hair, one of them has straight hair, questioned like what their background is.
Right.
And I remember when I had taken one of them out when she was probably 3 or 4. And, she was calling me Auntie Kaanji, and people were like, oh, you let her call you that? I said, why wouldn't I? They're like, well, are you her babysitter or her nanny?
Oh my gosh.
Like, no, I'm her Auntie Kaanji.
Yeah.
And so again, like, I think people look at situations, they look at children, and then they look at the adults, and they want to figure out how we can, quote unquote, categorize kids. And I wonder what it's going to take for us to get to a place where we don't do that anymore.
And do you think that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What I get frustrated about that scenario specifically is that I see white families with Black children pretty often in our neighborhood. We have a few, and then, like around the neighborhood. And I never see them questioned. But if I see like a Black woman with a white child or a Black family with a white child, people ask more questions. That is so bizarre to me. I don't know if there's a question at the end of that.
Yeah.
But it seems people are more curious about one than the other and want to understand the how and the why more often. That's been my experience. I'm not generalizing. I'm telling you what I've seen. That's just a curiosity I generally don't have. Families are made up of all types, but I do see that people tend to question one more than the other.
Right. And I think that that's a point and a moment of reflection for our listeners and our family that's listening in, is to say, like, to question and to reflect on whether that's something that they have done.
Yeah.
And again, we think way back to the beginning of my relationship with my husband. He had he's white. He had teenage niece and nephew, and I'm hanging out with them, and they're calling me Aunt Kaanji, and the looks and the stares and the questions, and like, I'm like, how is she your aunt? And it's not something that I think my husband has ever gotten with my nieces and nephews, and so to your point, I think that there's a sense of like guarding or protection. Yeah. There's that sense of protection that people sometimes are like, well, if I see a white child with a non-white adult, how can that be? Like, how is that possible? And especially if it's a situation where there may be a familiarity or a familial name or naming there. Right. There is this sense like, we need to investigate. Right. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying that. Yes. I absolutely think that's what it is. And I think that it comes back to sort of what we were talking about, why you would ask somebody what their background is like a check for, like, even coming back to the conversation about hair, because we've talked about hair before.
Right.
We've talked about, the difference in your hair, my hair, kind of what you've dealt with in the workplace elsewhere. And what I keep coming back to, like with questions about hair or questions about families and who belongs to whom, is like, before you ask anybody questions or decide to opine on any portion of that, to ask yourself what it is that you're trying to do in the moment. Like, what is that going to solve? Or would you ask a white woman about her hair? Or would you ask a white family about their multicultural family? And if the answer is no, and the answer is you just can't help yourself, maybe stop. Yeah. Maybe don't ask the question.
Absolutely.
It's just something to think about.
Right. And when we think about how there are so many children out here that are born of families that are multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic. And again, they are going to be the majority in
10 years.
10 years. I was like
20 years.
I was trying to do the math. Like 20, 30 minus 20 in 8 years.
Yeah.
In 8 years, that's going to be the majority, is people who are either non-white or multiracial.
Right.
Right. And so we look at young kids and we want them to celebrate and be proud of their identities and kind of who they are, and not just who society kind of wants them to be.
Yeah.
And so a part of me is so sad that Roman, at a young age when he really doesn't get it, and he's never been to Italy, he doesn't really understand his Italian heritage,
chose one thing.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm Black because I look Black. And I don't want him to, again, either disrespect his father or his grandmother and that half of who he is. And it makes me sad. And I wonder, like, other people who are raising biracial kids, how they're able to balance that. And if their kids kind of align with what they facially look like, or if they align with the parent that they are closest with. Yeah. Does that also make sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I guess I was thinking while you were speaking too about, I mean, for you, have you considered what it might look like to encourage him to explore more of that side of things?
That's a great question. I've never discouraged it.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that I don't know what it is about his unwillingness to identify as half white. And I think a part of it is, and this is going to sound terrible, people don't believe him.
Yeah, I could get that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
everybody else was sort of identified for him.
Correct.
Right.
People are like, well, and
You're
why
Black.
would, and then why it would lead to more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that probably is why. And I haven't discouraged it. And there are some people that identify. I have a teammate and a colleague, and she identifies as 100% Black and 100% Japanese.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
And she said, because I am 100% of both. And I said, that is so beautiful and so lovely. Yeah. And I love that you have the confidence to say that.
Yeah.
And she's like, I really want to make sure that I honor my entire heritage.
Do you think, I'm going to get this question, please forgive me and allow me some grace while I ask this question, because I don't know if I'm going to ask it right. Obviously, Roman's half white, and obviously that's Italian culture. But do you think there's also, is it hard to identify as white from a cultural standpoint? When you're out and about, like, what is that? You know what I mean? Right. Am I asking that question right? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I hear you, and I don't want to misspeak, but I think that, for him, is he trying to identify as white, or would he say, I'm half Black and half Italian?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because if he just says I'm half Black, I'm half white, and then you try to, like, encourage him to say he's both, but I could see how there's a cultural difference there.
Right.
I can see how that would be like, well, what does that mean to be half white? I don't know.
And that leads to more questions.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, is it that we don't have those conversations or questions just because it takes up a lot of time 100%, and energy?
Yeah. Right? He's like, look at me, I'm Black. I feel that.
He's like, I'm just not going to have this conversation.
I totally get that. Maybe not now. Maybe when he's grown up and he's got good answers. I don't know.
And a part of it is, sometimes you don't like being the topic of conversation.
Right. You don't want to be on show. You don't want to be the show. Yeah.
And we don't want to be the person that it's like, okay, now I have to explain who I am when it's so deeply personal.
Yeah.
However, people kind of expect you to be willing to explain kind of like who you are. If there's a part of your personality or part of your persona that may be, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't obviously fit into a box that somebody in their mind has envisioned for you, then it's like, oh, and we're not just talking about race and ethnicity. We're talking about gender.
Yes.
It's like, if you aren't, like,
you're the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
You may have to share your experience as a woman, and you're like, well, I don't speak for all women. Like, correct. I get that.
Yes. And so for me, the one thing, as we get ready to kind of wrap up, the one thing that I would just encourage people to do who are raising multiracial or biracial kids is to start to really dive into how our kids are identifying, how they're sharing their experience, and kind of what those experiences are. Sometimes they may feel like they're lonely or alone, but I think the numbers are on their sides. We start to look and say, like, this is who this country is, and this is what this country is going to look like.
Yeah.
And we have to figure out a way to make it a little bit better and figure it out for them, and we talk about from a policy perspective. You know me, I'm an attorney. I was like, let's just get rid of the boxes, because what that is doing is it's further categorizing people.
Yeah.
So I'm someone who's like, why are we still
What does this do?
asking these questions
Yeah.
on forms?
Yeah.
Like for what purpose do we need to know this information? And are we further segregating and dividing us by race, ethnicity, and gender? And I've heard people say, oh, it's just so we can have these affirmative action programs that are going to benefit people of color. I was like, really? That's the reason why?
You need me to check the box so you can give me the thing? Come on now.
I was like, actually,
I feel like that does a disservice in some ways.
100%.
Then you only get picked for the one thing.
Right. Or it's starting to say, like, who are those that are a part of this group and those that are not?
Yeah.
And I would advocate that we get rid of the boxes that we're trying to hold each other in, because what we do is we create these boxes in our mind and we're trying to just fit things in. And we should know that in this world, we can't do that. Think about our globe. We're a circle. We got to figure out kind of a way to fit in there instead of these boxes, unless you're a flat earther. If you're a flat earther, then
we can't help you.
Can't help you.
It's about more inclusiveness. How do we include more instead of keeping people out?
Right. The one thing that I would encourage people who have children of multiracial heritage to kind of have conversations with them about questions that they've received or kind of like what their experiences are, so they can better educate themselves, and to get back to kind of, as we're looking at people as people, like start to question ourselves and do that introspection. It's like, why is it necessary for me to know what your background is or the background of someone else is? And am I having these thoughts or presumptions or stereotypes about people just by looking at them? And if so, really pause and think, like, why is this happening? Why am I thinking this? And why does it matter?
Absolutely. I think what I was thinking earlier when we were kind of wrapping that point up is just understand that no one owes you their story just because they're a little bit different than you. They don't have to explain that to you in their experience. You can just enjoy them for who they are.
That's perfectly said.
And that's it.
And I enjoy you for who you are.
Same. Ditto.
Ditto.
We love having you with us, guys, each week. Make sure you're following us on all of your favorite listening platforms so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. We're having a lot of fun this season. And if you haven't already gone to Instagram and followed us at Black and White Momcast, please do that as well.
We so appreciate you taking time to be a part of our family. At the end of the day, we are all one family. With that being said, Tara and I are going to sign off this week. Guard your health, mental, physical, and spiritual. We will be back next week, same time, same place. Take really good care, podcast family.
There's no one more Irish than me. So I want to thank the genealogists who traced my family tree. Right here. Thank you.